Hello, everyone. We're your hosts, Beth Orr,
And Bridget Querns.
and we welcome you to Quick Moments in Passionate Pursuits The Unfolding, where intuitively guided conversations are followed with feral faith, enthusiasm, and joy, bringing new insights, inspiration, and perspectives along the way. So, we're really excited about this topic. We've been thinking about this for, it feels like months, but today we're going to be talking about the web. And what is the web and how does it affect our lives, and giving you a little bit more to think about when you consider this topic. And Bridget, I would wonder if you would like to start with you have this beautiful visual that you give when it comes to the
Mm,
web. And I think a really good place to start is with some picture or some image that
hmm
people can imagine to jump into this experience and this discussion with us.
Yeah. I feel like this image has been surfacing for me repeatedly throughout my lifetime. Like the first glimpse of it was when I was younger. And for some reason, I can recall at this summer camp, like in elementary school. So I was really, really little. I was being called Spider because I had long legs. And I'm like, I don't even like spiders that much, but my mom really liked daddy long legs because they're so gentle and they've got these like graceful long legs. So I'm like, okay, I'll take it. That's interesting. Like I don't get nicknamed very often, so cool. And then as I went through this sort of spiritual awakening, I had this image come up for me of we're like on this spider web, and each of us is sort of at one of those points where the web intertwines. And when things occur for us, or even when we send out our energy, it's like this energy, this vibration reverberates through the web, and those who are closest to us on this web feel that reverberation quickly and more strongly. And it can do a couple things. It can call those connections who align with that vibration closer to us. It can draw them in, and it can also shake those connections that are not necessarily aligned to the point where they may scurry away or fall away or choose not to be as close to us. All of which, in the long run, is beneficial for each of us as a soul, because what we truly want is those individuals who are most aligned, most connected, are with whom our visions, our shared visions are shared. Our shared visions are shared. Our shared visions are um, similar in the sense that we are working to serve in a way that complements one another.
Mm.
So that's the image of the web that I get. And the more, it's so funny because we're going to talk about this, but the more I pay attention to it and the more I think about it and the more I recognize it at work in my everyday life, the more the image shows up over and over. I'll see spider webs, or someone will mention the web, or we did this activity in a business incubator that I'm part of. The closing activity for our first summit together was literally creating a web together. We had this ball that we would pass around, and we would give someone a compliment and throw the ball to them and hold our little piece of the web. And at the end, we just saw that we were all connected, and we each had a chance to tug and see how it affected every other individual who was connected that closely on the web. And like this image for me had come up quite a long time before we did that activity. So it was really, really powerful for me. I cry at a lot of things, but I shed some tears because it was just so, it cemented, it crystallized that idea of how closely connected we are to people, even when they are across the country, across the world, or even departed.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think why this is so particularly important, I think, for people, this concept of the web is so many times we have emotions that we're experiencing, we have situations that are coming before us, and we don't know why they're coming to us or where they're coming from. But yet, what this also tells us is that who we have in our web
Mm,
and who we have most closest to us impacts the way we think, the circumstances that are before us, the way we approach problems, the types of emotions that we have. And so sometimes some of what we're feeling and we don't know where it comes from. And if it's displaced, we can kind of look around us
mm,
and go, well, what's going on in my inner circle? And it's really my inner web. It's like what's going on closest to me. And then kind of going out a little further if you see within your closest circles and within that web that maybe somebody doesn't have something, or maybe they're just not sharing it, right? Regardless if you know about it or not, it doesn't mean that it's not true and happening and occurring in your life and that you're seeing the results of that.
yeah. Yeah. It brings up the question of, is this a feeling that I am generating in response to something? Is it mine? Does it belong to me? Or is it something that I am sensing from somewhere else?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then that question, obviously there are people in our lives, whether it's our coworkers or, people that we're next to often every day. There's people in our lives that don't necessarily think the way we would want to think or respond the way that we would want to respond. And then how do we in the web interact with that when we are going to be experiencing that ongoing? And so it's almost like just like we have our own emotional intelligence and we're taking the social responsibility to be aware of who we are and what we're bringing to the table and what we're coming into situations with. It's like we also need to be aware that vibrationally we're
Mm,
entering into something where there is a web already attached. When we enter a space, there's a whole bunch of connections happening as we enter in, and it's like other people's webs are stretching and we're entering in together into the space. And the web, when you described it, I thought of it like a conduit, like
mm,
it's just this string, but it's a conduit. So whatever the emotional frequency or whatever the happenings are, the prominent happenings or emotional frequency is behind that web, it's like it's super quick, right? It's just like, and so you're being informed potentially when you walk into a space by many different um, messages that aren't clear and visible in front of you,
mhm. Oh my
right?
gosh. So as you're saying this, I just had this flashback to my childhood. So I grew up in the city of Buffalo, and in Buffalo, very early on, there were lots of roundabouts, like these really, really big roundabouts. Like you'll see them in other cities, but these were humongous. They would have like 8 streets coming into them. And in the center of one close to my house was this gorgeous fountain. So we would go to the fountain like you could go there and there was a bench all around it. You could like play in the fountain. This is like back in the 80s and 90s when it was cool to just jump in the fountains. Um, but I remember being there one day, and I think it was my sister and I who were at two ends. Like she was all the way around the fountain on the other side from me. And these benches were made out of stone. And you could put your ear to the bench on one side, and the other
Mm-hmm.
person could whisper
Mm-hmm.
in the curve of the other side, and you'd hear them clearly all the way around the other side.
Mm.
And I feel like this is such a good representation because it's vibration. Sound is vibration. And we know that we are electrical, energetic beings. That's how our heart beats. That's how, neurons pass on signals. We're electrical. So if you can't see the sound that comes out of my mouth, but you can hear it, then I think you could apply the same concept to the fact that you can't necessarily see my electrical current or vibration that I am putting out, but you can feel it, and across great distances as well.
Hmm. Yeah, this brings up a really interesting story. Just this actually makes sense of what had happened to me. So I was this was about 4 years ago. I was in New York City. A colleague of mine were leaving after a conference, and we had gotten to JFK, and we were 1 minute and 59 seconds until we were supposed to check our luggage, and it was supposed to be 2 hours. And because we were a minute late, they were like, "Nope, you got to go in and reschedule." We were like, "What? This is crazy. We're 2 hours early." So we go in, we're freaked out. We've got to, like, we neither one of us can have an overnight. And she ends up, long story short, she ends up getting on this other, she gets to end up getting on our flight, and I end up getting on a flight in LaGuardia. And I run out to the taxi line, and the taxi line is so long. But while
Mm.
I'm running, I hear a guy whisper, "Need a cab." And I was like, "Oh God, what did you just say?" And it was like an illegal cab service with a guy that has a gray hoodie, and he takes me out past all the taxi people. I go with this guy. I'm in the car. It's unmarked. I have no idea if it's even legitimate at this point. And I'm like, "Go. I need to be there in like 20 minutes." He hauls ass. Excuse me. He hauls out. We're flying. And he's going along the edge. We're going like way past what we should. We shouldn't be on the edge of the road. He's trying to get me there. But then all of a sudden, I see my phones are dying. And I have two phones. I have a work phone and a personal phone, and they're both dying. And I see that I'm headed towards the Hudson. And I get this sinking feeling. I'm going to die. This guy has me in his car, and I'm going to die. Now, what's interesting is everything in me said, "This is shady. This isn't okay. I'm not okay." And I thought, well, maybe it's just my own fear cord. So I send a message real quick to my friend and I say, "Hey, this is what's happening." And then my phone dies. I'm done. So I just sit there and I'm like, just trying to be at peace. And all of a sudden, he makes a turn and we head and we pull up at LaGuardia. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I lived." But here's the frequency thing. Everything was fine. I told myself I was silly and he wasn't going to kill me. But what ended up happening is he stole my credit card and he stole my identity. So he was vibrationally shady.
Mm.
I got that right. Something told me something is amiss. Something is off here. Something is happening. I can't quite put what it is. My mind starts jumping to the scenarios.
Mm.
It doesn't know what it is. So seeing the Hudson, I think, "Oh, this is what it is." But what was really happening is I was right about the vibration. There was an ill intent, but I couldn't figure out the exact resonance. And I wonder if part of that is when we don't have as much experience with a particular resonance,
Mm.
it's less familiar to us.
Mhm.
Like, like if I was a shady individual and I had a lot of experience with shenanigans, I might get in there and know exactly what this particular line of shady is.
Yeah, yeah.
But because I'm not as familiar with that and that's not my resonance, then I just know that it's something wrong, but I don't know what.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. I wrote that down because what I wrote was our mind generates explanations for vibrations or resonance, and specifically for vibrations or resonance that our body somatically can't yet identify.
Yes.
Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but at least in my experience, different vibrations live in different areas of my body.
Mhm.
So, like I could say stress, but that's kind of nondescript, like something really, really like grief. Like, where do you feel grief? For me, grief literally it pushes in around my heart center, but I can feel it in my back too. It's like on from both sides. That's the location in my body where I feel grief. When I feel inspired or lit up, it's almost like the top of my head is glowing. Like that's the feeling that I get
Mhm.
from it. Those are sensations and vibrations with which I'm familiar. But the sensations or vibrations I can't place, they'll sit in my body in certain locations, but I'm like, what is this? This is not, maybe it's not something that my body routinely generates or is used to processing.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. It gets back to that kind of that because of the lack of experience with it, it's like we can just generally sense the sensation, but
Mm.
it's like we have to put a lot of different "what is this?"
Mhm.
scenarios at it to discover like what really is this, right? And if
Right.
we're lucky, like in my situation, I find out and with relatively harmless, right? I find out that yes, it wasn't true that he was going to kill me, but it was true that he was going to harm me in some way, right? So we
Mm.
can start to, I think what I tend to do is to kind of start to put, it's almost like I have this running dictionary. It's not a dictionary, but it's this categorization system inside me where I feel like it informs my intuition, but it's not firm, and it's not something I have direct access to. I can't just flip it open and say what's on that thread of this response. But yet I know that each time I have a new situation that contributes to this chord, that now are this emotional frequency, that now I have more information which expands what this really could be, and I'm paying attention to say, is this true, or is this just something that's on my fear cord? And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, like thinking with my head or thinking with my heart, and trying to discover, well, when is it necessary to think with my head versus my
Mm.
heart? Because usually I think I want to think with my heart, but when do I toggle out and need to think rationally with my head, right?
Mhm.
Because I
Interesting.
feel like this web is on the heart,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know?
I almost feel like that strand where we're connected originates from or is pulled into the heart.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so I wrote down, I had this experience. Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. Had this experience yesterday. I'm out in the yard with my kids, and I think I step on something that's painful, but I'm not real certain that I did. So I get inside and I'm like, oh, what is that? And I pull out a shard of glass in my toe. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. Toss it out and don't think much more about it. I got the object out. I'm good. Walk into the kitchen. I'm washing my hands. Walk over to the living room to check on and then I look down and there is a puddle of blood beneath me. And there is a trail of blood, like where I had walked from the back door into the kitchen, into the living room. I'm like, oh my gosh, I was like making a mess all over and was completely unaware of it. And then this like spirit whisper comes in and is like, hey, it's like the web. It was like, if you have a wound and you tend to the wound appropriately, like the goal is that in this life experience, we're going to get wounded, and those wounds are going to strengthen us and they're going to work with us and for us. And when we tend to them appropriately, then we don't leave a mess behind us or a mess that stretches out to other parts of the web. But even when we're unaware, and it's not that I was like intentionally spreading this mess, but I was unaware and I wasn't tending to myself. And in not tending to ourselves, even if it's done unconsciously, we can unintentionally spread this mess to other
Mhm.
places. And I was
Mhm.
like, holy cow. what does that mean? Like, this for me is a really difficult idea to work with, because it's like we have to process. Like, we are meant to process and to feel and to allow these catalysts to work with us and work through us. But at the same time, how do I do that without bleeding all over?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not appropriate to suppress, repress those feelings or those wounds. Right. So we don't want to do that, but that's not the answer to not bleeding all over. So what is it? Like, how do we work through this? I'm going to have difficult emotions. I'm going to get wounded, and I want to use those experiences appropriately without impacting everyone around me.
Yeah, that's a really valid. I was thinking about something similar with that responsibility that we have once we understand. In this model that I work on with the Sanctuary Institute, we it's a trauma informed care model, and one of the tenets is the social responsibility component to the emotional intelligence of ourselves with what we're experiencing, and it reminds me of that. Like, it reminds me of why we have the social responsibility to be emotionally intelligent and to attend to ourselves, because even if we're physically absent from somebody, it they if we're connected to somebody, they experience it. It's a misnomer to think that because we're shut up in the other room, or we're across the state, or we're somewhere else, that if we're connected to somebody, it's a misnomer to think that they're not being impacted.
Mm,
So then for me personally, my work goes into attending to what it is really quickly, because just like any, like if you think about the universe, in the universe, we say that, of course, we're going to have emotional responses to things that are happening, and we should, because otherwise we're suppressing and it will come up. But once we experience something and we have those emotions, the importance of releasing it, of putting it, like, that's why forgiveness is so important when something happens, or that's why, attending to what's the lesson here, or how do I need to make sure that I feel safe, or whatever it is, to pivot quickly and to handle that, as opposed to taking time. um Time's important though, like, to
mm,
process, and that's where it's like, I think the important thing for me is that I'm actively engaged in whatever it is until its resolution, and
mm,
taking the time to do that, because I recognize that the longer I stay in a space that's icky, which beyond what I need, then not only does it affect me, but it's affecting other people. And I'm much more likely to fix something if it's affecting other people than myself, which is actually a good thing to recognize it's affecting other people, because then inadvertently I'm affecting myself in a positive way.
yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, for sure. It really does help to picture, even just to picture this web and pull it into your mind and think, okay, who's connected to me? And I suppose also, if it feels appropriate, to maybe reach out and say, hey, this is what I have going on. Or if you're feeling something and it's not from you, to reach out and say, hey, how are you doing? Like, really, really, how are you doing?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I just believe that the more we lean into it, to this concept, and the further we evolve as a human species, the more this web is going to become not only important, but vital to our survival and a key piece of our flourishing. Like, it is there to inform and to protect in a way that our nervous system was before. We're now seeing this central nervous system that is not centralized to us. It's a central nervous system of a complex of individuals. And it's there to inform the whole complex when one part. I'm looking at my Monstera plant right now, and this is like making more
Mm,
sense. It's like when one leaf of a plant is not flourishing completely, it sends a message, and all of the other parts of that plant can respond appropriately. The leaves will actually turn and move themselves. The roots, a monstera has air roots, so an air root in that stalk may grow longer. The whole body, being all these individual parts that are knit together, will respond to the needs of one of those leaves or one part of that plant. So I think it's the same with the web. I think the intention of this web that we're cultivating is that it's going to contribute to the overall health and well-being of the complex of individuals that we're sort of spreading out, but also pulling in at the same time.
Yeah, what that reminds me of is my grandmother used to pray every single night before she go to bed for all the people in her life that she knew with their particular prayers.
Mm.
And I remember seeing recently, maybe about a week ago, somebody online said, pray for everybody that you know, like, and gave this reason. And all of a sudden, it had me thinking about the web. And I realized that oftentimes unconsciously, or without reason, without our understanding of the reason why we're doing something, we do something that is actually really positive for us. In that when we take 15 minutes in the evening to pray for every single person we know with generous intention, and we send light and love, that is magnified back to us. It's like we're also helping our network. We're sending out something within the mycelium, right, of the
Mhm.
tree. We're literally sending nutrients to the whole being, right? And I feel like not only through prayer, but then also through expectation, if something is dying and we're thinking something is dying, then it contributes to its death, right? It's like whatever way you go on something, I think it can be positive or negative given the expectancy of the originating entity. It's an
Mhm.
interesting it's an interesting thing. I think this is why people do cord cutting sometimes, right? Because
Yeah.
like if you're connected to something that no longer serves you or can actually be harmful, then there's this need to cut that cord so that the webs aren't connected and can attach to something else.
Okay, so I had this fascinating discussion with a client just last week, and we were talking specifically about cord cuttings.
Mm,
And what we said about them was, have you ever done a cord cutting or know someone who's done a cord cutting? And they're like, oh, well, it didn't work. It didn't work.
mm,
I did it and it didn't work. And we were talking about why that may be. And what I saw was, okay, so you're intimately connected with this individual in your web and they're close to you. If you cut the cord between yourself and that person, there's still lots of other cords connected on other sides of them. And if they, rustle those cords, eventually that vibration is going to get back to you.
mhm,
So in a cord cutting, it's important not just to do that, but also to reinforce it with your thoughts and your beliefs. I am separate. I do not receive the vibrations from this individual. I send them light and love and I release them. And to reinforce that over and over, sometimes daily at the beginning, because they're still connected in other ways. And if you do the cord cutting, it's always important, and I know you talk about this a lot, the intention. The
mhm,
intention has to be to fully release and
mhm,
disconnect yourself. You can't just do a cord cutting because you want it to magically release you from this person. You have to have the intention that by doing this, I am just solidifying the intention that's already there, that's already present. And I'm going to carry that intention forward with even more strength and depth as I move on. I think that's why sometimes people will say, well, I did it and it didn't work. Okay,
right.
well, let me draw up this image for you of what's going on here.
Can you hang on for just a second? I'm so sorry. Hey, I'm on a call. Is there, or can you come back in like 15, 20 minutes? Or are you doing something else here?
No, ma'am, this is what I came here for.
Okay. I'm on a video, like I'm producing something right now. You can go ahead if you want to, if you can just kind of be quiet, maybe. Yeah. Okay, thanks. You'll see where they are and what they are. Thank you so much. Okay, we're just gonna have to cut that out, okay, of the thing.
No
And
problem.
I've got somebody in here kind of working around, so we'll deal with it. Okay, where were we at?
Cord cutting and when it works and when it apparently doesn't work. Yeah.
I think that one thing that's really important is what you said about the intention, because you can't have this, like, you can't have this feeling of, oh, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
If I do this, let's see what happens, right? Because then the intention isn't pure to what you were originally doing it for. If you're actually going to cut the cord, then you have to cut the cord. But if you're going to have the intention of seeing what happens, you're already still in it, right? So the cord cutting is literally saying, I am done. This is finished. And on my end, it's released. And any kind of seeing what's there, leaving any kind of opening still leaves it connected, right? What you verbally say has to match your emotional frequency and intention. You have to be aligned with that in order for it to stick.
And something I've heard and experienced with cord cutting is that often, so again, if you're picturing the web in your mind and that person is in their spot on the web, and you cut the cord between yourself and the person, they're going to feel that energetically. Now, like we talked about earlier, they may feel it and not understand what it is that they're feeling, but they will feel it. And it may be a foreign sensation to them. And if they're in tune enough, they may even reach out. So I've heard people say, expect that when you cut the cord, they may begin to contact you because they felt something and they were, sometimes they're intuitive or empathic enough that they even know the direction it's coming from. So be prepared for that. And I think this is all, again, just evidence of the existence of this web.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it's this subtle, you won't realize, like, sometimes people don't even realize that they've had that shift, that energetic shift themselves. But what is always interesting, I think, is that once you start to, even with a decision to end that relationship or to modify that relationship and shift the energy from how it was, somebody else will feel that, and you'll come into their mind. Something will kind of ping you because you notice something is slightly off. Like, I had a friend recently tell me that a friend of theirs reached out to them, and they were having a challenge with this person recently and kind of like thinking about them. And because of the way that they had shifted in thinking about this relationship, this person reached out and responded directly to this emotionally unsaid thing that they were feeling. It was like that person felt that on the thread and reached out in order to say, hey, I just want you to know I've been thinking about this, and this is like something that I want to share with you. And this person was like, this just got reconciled, and all I did was state submitting this person submitted and said, this is just, it is what it is, and I'm not going to fight this or try to change this.
Mm.
So it was in that submission of the state of this is just what it is, that it actually got better. So I do think there's something too also when we don't fight something or have fear about something or reluctance or all of those negative emotions, and we actually just accept it and we submit it for the highest good, then I think it can also have a positive benefit in the least amount of like way that we have to even be involved.
Mm-hmm.
Like in this way, it just by processing it and submitting it and releasing it, it got better.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one of the reasons I love breath work as a healing modality, because it is not a conscious practice, just like meditation. It's a practice where I guess you are conscious of your breath, but it's not I have to think through this and figure this out and work it out. It's a very, not just unconscious, but what's the word I'm looking for? Hands off, not active, passive
Yeah.
and unconscious.
Right.
So in this practice, somatically, things will clear. Deep-seated emotions, things that were stuck in your soma, in your body, that were causing dis-ease in those areas will just clear through this practice. And you may or may not even be aware of what you've cleared. It may just feel different. That's why I love the practice of breath work, because it does just what you were talking about. It unconsciously and passively clears things that you would think would take a great amount of work to process, but it doesn't have to.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was thinking about one thing that I think would be kind of interesting for us to do related to this is because of this network tugging and pulling on us. And we're starting to notice that you and I have started to notice that when we have concepts and ideas come up, that they show up in other parts of our network. And there's something about this before I mention this other thing. Once we start to have awareness that what is happening to us in our web and network is manifesting in its own script, in its own way, in another person's direct web and network, then we start to recognize it even more and more and more and more. So what we've had happening is this is going on regardless if we understand it or know it or believe it or not, right? And so when we have a conversation about something, like, for example, earlier we were talking about freckles and how we're just becoming one big freckle in the summer because of how much when we get in the sun, that's what it looks like. Well, you mentioned this story, and I'm like, I just had this conversation 4 days ago with somebody about freckles and being one big freckle in the sun. I can guarantee you that if I go to another one of my friends, that they're having a similar like somebody has said this to them.
Yep.
So the conversation that it's in is different, but the content is the same, and it's starting to show up and manifest in other relationships in our lives. So what's the implication of that?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is what we just said is something that's totally not spiritually significant, at least not in any way that we can immediately identify. But I think the implication of that is, well, what if it could be? Like, what if we could page the universe to bring about these things, to vibrate these things into our immediate orbit? Well, we can, and that is extremely significant.
Yes.
It is a more passive way. It's a shifting of the paradigm of the way in which we work and the way in which we get things done. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that we are not in control, but we are co-creating with the source that controls everything, that animates everything. So it is both a submission to the fact that we're not all powerful, but also an acknowledgement of the fact that indeed we can be in co-creation with this power that exists. So it's like a handshake agreement. It's like a wink or a nudge to this power that we are then submitting to, but also working with. It's really, really, it's a paradox, and it's beautiful. Yeah, so I think what we wanted to do was play with this idea, and we've experienced this in very spiritually significant ways, but also, like we just said, in very fun, playful, kind of insignificant ways as well. And what we wanted to do was share. So we're going to come up with 2 concepts or objects that we are going to send out into this web, to this universe, share one of them and keep one of them to ourselves, and see the ways in which over the next week these show up for our immediate connections in this web or in other places.
Yeah, I would actually be curious about if any of the listeners who get this, because it'll be 3 weeks before somebody gets this recording. And so I would be interested to see if somebody has noticed these concepts showing up in their life 3 weeks ago, or if they notice them showing up after they listen to this recording, which shows that time and space is actually something that holds the information. It would mean that somebody doesn't necessarily get it right away at the 3-week mark now, because they haven't heard it until 3 weeks. So does this information, once they hear it, start to take effect and impact their web when they hear this, right? So is there this delay to the information when they receive it, or do they get it immediately now before they ever understand it? I mean, it's
Yeah.
I would expect it to show up in your and my life and in the people that are closest to us, but I would be interested with how far it reaches with people, and if there's a delay, and if it matters, if they experience the one that's said out loud, or the one that we just quietly are saying to ourselves but submitting into our sphere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so
what
what's
I've
your
done, so what I've done is I've chosen something to say out loud that I think is going, you're going to have to pay more attention for this to really notice this thing showing up. And I've kept the one quiet that I'm audaciously putting out there. Like, I want it to be really blatantly obvious. So when we say it, somebody will go, "Oh, yeah, I saw that. I definitely remember that because it was really obvious." So
Okay.
the subtle one is orchid flowers.
Okay. Orchids. Okay.
I don't
All
even
right.
know, like, I'm not a big flower person. I don't even know if they're in season right now. So even better if they're not. I have no idea.
Right. Okay. So orchids is yours. Mine, and I also choose something that's usually um subtle enough that it won't necessarily, it's not something that most people would have come up
Yeah.
on the regular. And same thing with my one I'm gonna keep quiet. So my thing that I'm gonna share, yours is orchids, mine is Wim Hof.
Mm,
So
okay.
Wim Hof.
Beautiful. All
Cool.
right.
That's gonna be cool. I'm already excited.
Me
I'm
too.
already
Me
excited to
too.
see what happens.
The last time I
Especially
played,
recognizing that. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I was thinking the last time I played this game with the universe, I actually put it on Instagram that I was playing this game, and I said, I haven't seen a game of T-ball in forever. I can't remember the last time I've seen it. So I put it out there. I'm like, all right, I got a challenge for you. T-ball, bring it. I'm on vacation in Virginia Beach, of all places. We're driving back from a shopping trip to our house that we were renting for the week. And we passed by this field of kids during recess And they're playing t-ball on those orange traffic cones. Like you couldn't miss it. And I look and I'm like, the hair on my everywhere stands up. And I was like, oh my God, do you guys see this? They're playing t-ball. Do you see this? I got so excited about it. And then of course, when we got back and I wasn't driving anymore, I went on Instagram to report this because it was so fun. And it just gave me so much joy. I was like, thank you for playing with me. Like that was so fun.
Yes.
And how neat to
Yeah.
have it show up in such a silly way, like on traffic cones. I'm like, that's a brilliant, like I wasn't even picturing that. But
Mm,
remember that this can show up, like I may be thinking of an orchid flower, like I'm picturing the plant, the live orchid, but it could show up in so many different ways, so many subtle ways, in the tea that your favorite cafe is serving that week. Like who knows the ways it could show up? And that's where it
yeah.
gets really fun.
Yeah. And it also reminds me of the interconnectedness and the relationship between the web and the law of attraction.
Hmm.
Because that's what we were talking about when your T-ball came up. We were looking at, for me, it's the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel
Yep.
Tower is an object that I focused on that comes up that I hadn't seen and now is just on the regular. But the shift happens when there's an intention and an expectation. And so I think it's it's almost like the web is almost like the visual to the law of attraction at work.
Mm,
It's like the
yeah.
law of attraction is this frequency that works on the web, and our intention and expectation, what we believe will come back to us and what we're sending out and intending, changes the relationship with what happens, right? So when we submit and we say, I don't know, like an orchid could show up on a tea package, or it could come up in all these different ways, but it's going to come up and I'm just waiting and anticipating, then watch out. Like watch out if you say, where are these orchids going to show up? But I'm excited. Oh, I can't wait to
Yeah.
see how many different places, right?
Me too. Yeah.
Now, sometimes people will be like, well, it's just bringing our attention to what's already there and we didn't notice before. But I will caution you with that, because when I first started this, yes, it could be that, but it can also be that our circumstances are being co-created by our expectation. So, for example, when I first started with the law of attraction and I had the object of the Eiffel Tower, I went into a place that I had been the day before and I presumed that the Eiffel Tower object that was in front of me was there the day before and I hadn't seen it. And what this person said is no, this just came in this morning. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so then I started going, okay, so I didn't see the Eiffel Tower and then choose the Eiffel Tower. I chose the Eiffel Tower without knowing that it would come. That's
Mhm.
very different,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And the
Um,
implications to that is it goes beyond. It goes beyond the Eiffel Tower and orchids. It gets into our what else do you expect? If you expect something not to work, it's not going to work. If you expect something to work, it's going to work. And when you leave space for something to work and you don't know the way it's going to work, then you open up that it's going to work, and it's going to work in a lot of different ways. But if you have a very specific way that you want to manage and micromanage and control something, then it's going to work in the way that you're going to do it, but it's you doing it and it's not the universe doing it. And that's a very different outcome.
Oh my gosh. Someone who I love, a meditation teacher. She founded Ziva Meditation. I'm blanking on her name, but I will have it for you in just a moment. But Emily Stella Fletcher. I love her. But she was talking about manifestation, and she was saying all that matters when you're manifesting is the why and the what. This is what I'm manifesting, and this is why it would bring me joy. And then you leave the how and the when up to the universe. Those are not for you to answer. Those are like handing this over to, whatever you want to go, God, spirit, the universe. Here, that's your part. For me, this is what, and this is why. Also, I have a question. Was that individual who was in your apartment working on something with lighting or electrical? Okay, because I saw the light like kind of flicker on the wall behind you, and then my
Yeah.
light bulb fell out of my lamp. It's laying, I can't show you because it's right here. It's laying on top of my computer right now. It fell out of my lamp on top of my computer. That's why I got brighter. So
That is the web
I
in
just,
action.
when that person walked into your apartment, I almost wrote a note to you and held it up on the computer. And I was like, no mistakes. Like he's there for a reason. I'm assuming it was a he because I heard the voice, but I almost wrote that and held it up because I was like, that person is there right now interrupting during this for a reason. And then the light fell out and I was like, I have to know, was he working on that?
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I
Yeah.
mean, that is that like, okay, so let's just talk about that for a second. This stuff's real.
Yeah.
This like just because we don't understand it and we typically don't have proof of it because it's so outside what makes sense to us in our lives. But literally, this is an example of like literally like the maintenance team here, they're awesome. I First of all, I have probably had
There you go. Just proof.
oh my
Yep.
gosh, holy cow.
Okay.
I have probably had these 3 of the 6 lights out for some time, but I don't pay attention to stuff like that. And yesterday I noticed it and I was like, oh, I'm going to put in a maintenance request because it actually had that they did these lights. And I was like, great. So I put it in. They're usually in the same day. They didn't come yesterday. They
Yeah.
came today. They usually tell me when they're going to be coming. And I would have said, don't come now. They didn't do that. They didn't tell me they were coming now. So the fact that they came now was the universe like saying, I'm going to give you this real time example. And we've felt that. We've felt like the universe really wants to get our attention, and not just our attention, but our listeners' attention, to see the power of expectation. We literally can, whatever we want or don't want, whatever our vision or not having a vision for, whatever it is, we can have. But whatever we're putting out there matters. So it goes back to that. Are we guided by fear or are we guided by our heart? Are we guided by our reptilian brain or are we guided by our soulful heart?
Mhm.
Like whatever that is makes a difference. But I think what you said is really important. We're just responsible for the why and what, and the how and when is up to the universe.
Yeah.
Like if we can really just submit that and just let go, what a relief. Because what that says is that we can't control what is happening with other people in our web. But what we can do is release and give people so much space to make their own decisions so that they can go within their webs however they need to.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah.
Right? It's so nonviolent. It's so compassionate to say, I'm literally like releasing and just look, I feel like Spider-Man. Like I'm literally releasing. Right. Wow.
Mm.
So fascinating. I almost feel like that's the perfect visual. Like when we're walking around, we've got these, like Spider-Man has these like,
Yeah.
and we have to pay attention to where our attention goes because that affects what we do and
Yeah.
how we move in the world.
Yeah. Mm. I love it. I think that's a great way to wrap up this discussion. And I cannot, like, I am so pumped about the possibility that now we're getting the listeners and viewers in on this. And I can't wait to see how these things show up. I cannot wait.
Mhm. Yeah, I think maybe we'll do a poll and ask for folks to say if it shows up in their life in this next week when we put this out.
Yeah.
Give people an
Yeah.
opportunity to interact.
When you come on YouTube and watch this, just jump into the comments and let us know if these showed up for you and how they did. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay.
All right. A special thanks to Asheville artist Melissa Moss for our cover art. You can learn more about Melissa and her work at melissamossart.com. And of course, a great big thank you to Cloud Cult for our podcast music from their song, There's So Much Energy in Us. Read more about them at cloudcult.com. And thank you, friends, for listening. And until next time, peace, love, and light.